recognize Mr. Travis for 5 minutes.
Chairman Cicilline, members of the subcommittee, I appreciate you having us all here today to talk about an incredibly important subject that impacts all of us, Democrats, Republicans, Independents alike. Nearly 10 years ago, I started my own company, having no idea what direction media was going to move. That company, Outkick.com, is now one of the largest sports and opinion independent websites in the country. We've had a great deal of success. I also host a daily sports talk radio show from 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern, all 50 states, 300 plus AM, FM stations. And on August the 11th, the President of the United States came on my radio program. He came on because he wanted to talk about the need for college football and college sports to be played this fall. Not a particularly partisan issue. We talked about the NBA, we talked about the NFL, we talked about sports as the nation experiences sports. The day after the president came on my radio show, we covered that day, August the 11th, the stories that came out of that interview aggressively, as anyone would who had the President of the United States on their radio show. The day after that interview, Facebook tanked our traffic. The data in the appendixes that we attached for you show that the next day and over the next week, Facebook removed 68% of our audience, 76% of our new users. That cost my company hundreds of thousands of dollars. To me, it was clear content-based speech discrimination. Facebook didn't like that we had the President of the United States on our radio program, and they also didn't like that the majority of the coverage of that interview was positive, which, as a sports fan, it's hard to be negative when the favor of the president is aligned with games actually being played. That, to me, is an interesting anecdote into the overwhelming power that we have given to the big tech companies in this country. It doesn't stop there either. There's an interesting thing that happened to us just in the last couple of weeks. Some of you may have read an editorial in the Wall Street Journal by a man named Dr. Macri, who is a Johns Hopkins doctor, highly qualified. His opinion, written on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal newspaper, his opinion was that based on the current rate of vaccination, as well as the people who had already been exposed to COVID, it was likely by the end of April that herd immunity would be reached in this country. Certainly some scientists and doctors agree with that. Certainly some scientists and doctors disagree with that opinion. We wrote about that editorial opinion on our website. The article was not in any way complicated or difficult. In fact, our headline was straightforward. Johns Hopkins medical professional, herd immunity will be here by April. We published that on Facebook. Within a matter of days, we received a notification from Facebook with the downright Orwellian subject. Important notification, misinformation violation. Facebook told us that we were not allowed to share the opinion of a doctor on our website because they said it was a fact-check inaccuracy. It was, members of the subcommittee, an opinion of a reasoned and well-learned doctor. That is what the scientific method is. We argue about what the truth is in this country with an idea that we reach a better conclusion. Facebook's own fact-checkers labeled our article about an opinion to be factually inaccurate, which is an impossibility. Who checks the fact-checkers? Our traffic declined by 80%, as you can see, as soon as Facebook found this violation. We would all be rightly concerned if the government of the United States was making these kind of decisions. My concern is all of the big tech companies now have the same power that China has to regulate the internet in its country. Instead of the government doing it, We have allowed big tech to do it. I thank you and look forward to your questions.
And let's go through the news for a moment, and we'll stick to news for a moment. In 1982, and I'll go to Mr. Greenwald. In 1982, the Cleveland Press went out of business, and Cleveland went from 2 daily newspapers to 1. Was that because of the internet, as far as you know?
No, the internet did not exist in 1982.
In fact, were newspapers diminishing and consolidating throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s rather than expanding, particularly the classic daily citywide newspaper?
I think to a large extent that is true. I think when you look, and the broader question that you're asking is, I think, a good one. Can you create and fix antitrust violations, which I think are existing from big tech companies now, by creating an antitrust exemption for others? This is such a complex issue that seems to me to be a really, I understand the intent, and I think the intent is a good one, but the challenge of correcting antitrust power by creating antitrust exemptions seems to me to be an inherent difficulty.
And I very much agree, and I'm not trying to disagree with the problem, just question some of the solution.
Do you have a functioning First Amendment when only one side's allowed to talk? Do you have free speech when big tech, big media, and big government decides what can be said and what can be seen?
No, you don't.
Not at all.
Not at all. And I think that is the major issue that our country is facing today.
Yeah, more important than this broad concept of journalism, which I'm all for, it's the First Amendment, the right to speak and to speak in a political nature and not be censored for speaking out in a political fashion. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Shabern said in his opening statement that this bill would have high-quality professional journalism would be able to form in this consortium and cartel. Is Outkick high-quality journalism?
I would like to think so. Some would disagree.
Who gets to decide? Who defines what's high-quality journalism?
Well, I think that's one of the big challenges, is determining what is and what is not high-quality journalism. Some of the most high-quality journalism that we have seen over the years that has been praised has ended up not being true. Yeah, and that is why we need such a robust First Amendment in general, so that our battles, the marketplace of ideas, is not being artificially constrained, which is what I believe is happening now.
The market's supposed to decide what is and define what is high-quality journalism. The First Amendment decides that, not government. Is that right?
I think that's correct. Yes, sir.
You said something earlier too. You said, who fact checks the fact checkers? Who's supposed to do that?
It's fascinating. In my example, Facebook has flagged 2 different stories at Outkick as disinformation and destroyed our traffic as a result. The first one was linking to the CDC website. We appealed and said, how can you make this determination? The second one, as I said, was pretty straightforward. We linked to a Wall Street Journal editorial from a high-end medical scientist analyzing COVID. Both of those were flagged. We lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue because of Facebook's fact-checking decision. There was no appeals process. They don't even bother responding to us.
But in a general sense, Mr. Travis, isn't it supposed to be the First Amendment that also fact-checks the fact? More speech, right? I mean,
yes.
A number of Democrats have quoted Justice Brandeis. Justice Brandeis said, if there's, quote, misinformation or disinformation out there, the answer is not to squelch that and stop that. The answer is to allow more speech to happen, i.e. the First Amendment, correct?
That is the entire theory of Justice Brandeis's view of the First Amendment, and also the entire basis of the marketplace of ideas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After years of allowing false information about President Trump and the false Russia collusion information that we saw perpetrating across the American sphere, social media platforms then decided to ban legitimate content about Hunter Biden. This is disturbing because it's a reflection of the role these companies wish to play in dominating civic life and public discourse. But at the same time, the Washington Post and New York Times haven't been the best fact checkers. A concern of mine is that in addressing social media's dominance over the news, we will just end up allowing a different set of actors to do the same thing. My questions are for Mr. Travis and for Mr. Greenwald. How can we tackle this issue to create a fair playing field that promotes free speech and does not suppress ideas that are out of favor with elites in this country?
I think it's one of the most fundamental issues of American society today. How do you determine what stories are able to be shared and what stories are able not to be shared? Frankly, I don't consider it partisan at all that when the New York Post has its Twitter account absolutely shut down because of the news story that they are putting out, and all of big tech corresponds in conjunction together, that's the very definition to me of antitrust action. I wrote in my testimony, and I wanted to just hit it. I mean, think about how crazy it is that all of the tech companies in concert, whether you agree or disagree, and I come to this from a completely nonpartisan issue, whether you agree or disagree with what the president of the United States at the time, Donald Trump, was doing on social media, everyone out there should be terrified of how quickly everyone shut him down. Listen to this. In January of this year, Facebook, Twitter, Google, Spotify, Snapchat, Instagram, Shopify, Reddit, Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, and Pinterest all either banned or restricted the democratically elected president of the United States from speaking to the country on their platforms. Right now, Donald Trump may be the focus, but big tech has set the precedent that if they want to shut anyone down, even the most powerful person in all of democracy can be shut down. So how do you regulate the power that big tech has grabbed? I think the question that you're asking is probably the most central and important question that confronts our country today, because Trump will not be the last figure to have this happen to him. That's my concern.
That's a great point you bring out.
Mr. Travis, finally to you. Mr. Raskin, in his question, suggested that sort of criticism and condemnation is the same as cancel culture. And I value robust and unlimited criticism, like North Carolina Republican Party's censure of Senator Burr for his impeachment vote, for the revulsion at Kathy Griffin's holding aloft the apparently severed and bloody head of the sitting president. But isn't cancellation something different, where you destroy somebody's career, position, or livelihood in retaliation for a particular view?
Yes, I think it's a well-put question. To me, cancel culture is the difference between I disagree with you because, and I disagree with you and you don't have the right to make a living because of your opinion. Cancel culture takes it beyond the debate and goes to actually trying to cut someone out of the debate completely, argue about ideas, argue about decisions. Don't, in my opinion, take the next step and say, and your position invalidates you from being able to be involved in the conversation at all.
Thank you, Mr. Travis.
My question is for Mr. Travis, Greenwald, and Smith. If you can quickly just say, what are the things we really should look to make sure that we do not have this piecemeal approach and can create some unintended consequences?
It's a really broad question, and I think it's a really important question as well. To me, what we need to have first and foremost is regulation of the big tech companies. I think Mr. Smith has done a really good job of elucidating that this is not a one-size-fits-all policy, and there isn't any one thing you can do that solves the larger issues in our democracy as it pertains to the power of big tech. What I see, and I can speak to specifically for myself and the company that I run, is there are lots of companies like mine that the difference between making money and losing money is what the algorithm that Facebook chooses to put into play on any given day is. And the consistency of the rules that are being applied in a content-neutral fashion does not exist. And the power there, we have effectively given over, I truly believe this, the right to determine what a First Amendment violation is out of our courts, and we have given them to the big tech companies instead. And that represents a chilling effect, because I'll tell you this right now, the business side of my company, they said, hey, I don't know necessarily that we want to share internal data and upset Facebook and other tech companies, because they have the ability to vice grip, control in many ways businesses. And there are tons of them that are going to watch this clip and they're going to see the data that we shared and they're going to say, hey, that happened to us too. We didn't say anything because we hoped it was just going to go away. So I think it's not a fair fight right now. And the fight needs to be more fair. And to me, ultimately, that's what government's job should be. Create the standards and fair play to allow a fight to be fair in this industry.
There's been a lot of good questions asked today, and I don't want to duplicate those. So I'm just going to ask Mr. Travis and Mr. Greenwald. this is one of I think of a long series of steps that's going to get us to where we can deal with this process that's been happening to us for quite a while. This counsel culture, counseling a culture, our American culture. How do you see us finally get to that end where we've gotten control? And obviously, this is one of the many steps to get in control to where we can have this freedom of speech again, where we expect this as a country, that this should be a natural process. We can speak freely without feeling of being attacked. How do you see that coming to where we can end this process here in America? Let's start with Mr. Travis and Mr. Greenwald.
It's a great question, Congressman. And to me, every single American out there is terrified on some level every time they pick up Twitter, every time they pick up Instagram, every time they pick up Facebook, and they sit there for a moment and think about whatever opinion they're about to share, and they have to think to themselves, is this worth my life fundamentally changing? And to me, the marketplace of ideas, Congressman, requires that people not be afraid to say what they really think. And what we have created is such a stifled environment today that people are terrified to say what they think. They're also terrified that their kids might have a TikTok video out where they're singing along to a rap song and suddenly they can't get a college scholarship anymore. That's happening every single day across this country. And big tech has helped to create a censorious universe where, again, I said cancel culture to me is the difference between I disagree with you and I disagree with you and you're not even allowed to be involved in this conversation and you shouldn't be allowed to have a job either. And what we have to do if we want to have a full flourishment of democracy is start to fight back against that culture of censorship. And one of the ways that we do it, I believe, is by restricting the antitrust power that I believe the big tech companies have come to take over in the ensuing decade. And I'm sure Glenn can talk about that a lot better even than I can, but that's the essence of the question I think you're asking.
I think what we're talking about with this bill is to make sure that these news organizations that are going out of business have the chance to compete with these big tech giants for ad revenue. Right now, they don't. Right now, what we're seeing, and by the way, big tech doesn't have a bunch of reporters out there covering news stories or opinion writers writing news stories. All they do is they take someone else's product and they use that product for more and more profit for them and less profit or revenue for the other side. And so what I'm wondering is, what is the solution that you would, not to the world in general. We agree, especially on this side of the aisle, that we need to do something about Section 230, and we need to do something about censorship. But in terms of this specific issue, revenue for small local news organizations, what do we do?
There's not an easy solution, right? And there is a multifaceted solution that I think is going to have to be built in order for things like this to work. I think Section 230 needs to be modified in many ways. I also think, to use the specific example that I was talking about, in courts, we have created a system where if a bad judge decision occurs at the district court, you can appeal it to the appeals court or all the way to the Supreme Court. When I look at Facebook, which is a monopoly, let's not pretend that they're anything other than a monopoly. It's almost impossible for news organizations to make budgets without working with Facebook, as Chairman, you just said in the example you used. What I think they need to have is a fair and transparent system when they get things wrong to allow them to be remedied. Because ultimately, I'm going to be fine. But if our company doesn't make the revenue that we should on the content that we're producing, that means that I hire less people. That means that all of these companies that are here talking to you today trying to increase their revenue hire less people as well. And to the extent that I believe in the marketplace of ideas, which I do, we need as many voices as possible all speaking. And the way that the system is structured right now, we are not having that occur.